Chapter 1. That's why Havarti is the best cheese, said Bart, ending his argument as we walked into Foster's Market. I still prefer provolone, I said, disagreeing with the cat. Bart started to accompany me shortly after I first gained my powers as a witch. He wasn't actually a cat, but a familiar that had worked with witches for thousands of years. People typically gain their powers at a young age, but I didn't get mine until I reached 30 in the past year. I'm not saying provolone isn't good. I'm just saying it's not the best. Maybe things have changed since the last time you had cheese? Are you okay, Miss Foster? I looked up to find my newest employee, Jake Rowland, looking at me, concern on his face. Only people connected to the paranormal were able to see Bart, so it must have looked like I was just talking to myself. Don't mention it to her, idiot, said Jimmy Rowland, Jake's older brother, who was in charge of the produce department. She talks to herself from time to time, but I'm sure it's just her way of processing things. Isn't that right, Miss Foster? Why, yeah, exactly, I lied, nodding my head. I was getting careless with how often I spoke to Bart in public. I needed to be more careful. This wasn't the first time employees had noticed me doing it. I was so used to Bart by now that I had a hard time remembering he was invisible. How's the produce department treating you guys? I really like it, said Jake. Thank you so much for giving me this job. I smiled back at him. It wasn't that long ago that he was running around town, causing trouble with his friends. I was happy to help get him off the streets. He was a good kid and just needed some guidance. Jake has been okay, said his brother, looking Jake over. He's not a star employee like me yet, but give it some time. You two let me know if you need anything, okay? I said, smiling as I walked away. The brothers nodded, turning back to their work. That was a close one, said Bart as we continued down through the aisles of my store. That's not good if everyone thinks I talk to myself all the time, I whispered. I didn't want everyone to think I was crazy, but I guess that was better than them knowing that I was a witch. Turning down our canned goods aisle, I saw a familiar face looking down at some canned tomato sauce. Marvin, is that you? I asked. The man turned his head and gave me a smile. Marvin Novak was a local firefighter, just a few years older than me. We had gone to school together but never talked very much. He always seemed nice whenever we did, unlike some of the other kids in his grade. Hey Zoey, long time no see, he said. He was wearing a blue shirt that said Twistchapel Fire Department on the front and back. How are things going for you? I asked. Business is slow, so I can't complain, he chuckled. The town of Twistchapel was a relatively quiet town without too much trouble, at least from the outside. The more I got involved with the magical side of the world, the more I realized even my small town wasn't as safe as it looked. Regardless, we didn't deal with too many fires, outside of a few accidental or natural ones. How about you? It looks like business is treating you well. You've been open, what, 5 or 6 years now? Something like that, I said, nodding my thanks. Is there anything I can help you find? Marvin shook his head. Nope, finding everything that I came here for. Making spaghetti for the others? I asked, looking down at the tomato sauce. I'm sure you all eat a lot. And not that you guys are fat or anything, just, you've got to burn a lot of calories. What would you posses you to say that? Asked Bart. I had no clue. The words just came out sometimes. No worries, Maven laughed as I floundered. And no, it's for chili, of course. Of course. I asked. What, is there a firefighter and chili stereotype I don't know about? You do know about the chili cook-off this afternoon, don't you? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Chili cook-off? I said, thinking it over. No, I didn't know about that. We are doing a community chili cook-off today to help bring the community together to get some positive interactions with various public groups such as firefighters, the police department, etc. You should come. We should do it, said Bart, hopping up and down impatiently. We need to get out more. You haven't sleuthed around in a while, and it's honestly really boring just hanging out with you. Like really boring. Like I don't know if I can make it until tomorrow if we don't go to the chili thing today. I gave Bart a look. I didn't think I was that boring, but we did just have an argument about the best kind of cheese. We probably should go. I'll be there, I smiled. Great. You'll get to try Marvin's famous chili. Famous, is it? I grinned. It is award-winning, in case you didn't know, he shrugged. I said my goodbyes and left him to do his shopping. I walked down a few additional aisles, making sure that everything was going smoothly and saying hello to some of my other employees. Seeing that there weren't any fires of my own that needed to be put out, I made my way up to the front of the store, where my office was located behind the cash registers. "Morning, Zoe," said Bridget, one of my cashiers. "How are you doing, Bridget?" I asked my friend. We have been best friends ever since we were little kids, and it was great getting to work with her on an almost daily basis. "Any new special cases?" she whispered, leaning in close and ignoring my question. Bridget was one of the only people that knew I was witch. "Not lately," I said with a shake of my head. "What are you two whispering about?" asked Charlene, walking up to her cash register and getting situated. "Oh great," moaned Bart. "You've really got to start giving her some days off." Bart was not a fan of Charlene. Granted, no one really was aside from some customers. Charlene was not pleasant to work with, and didn't go out of her way to make any friends. She also seemed to not always understand that I was the owner and she was the employee. "Just girl stuff," lied Bridget. It apparently didn't occur to Bridget that Charlene was also a woman, but maybe Charlene wouldn't press it. "Girl stuff?" scoffed Charlene. "Aren't you two getting a bit old to be whispering about boys all the time?" "We aren't whispering about boys," I said. "I find that unlikely coming from you," said Charlene, laughing to herself. "What's funny about that?" I asked defensively. "If it isn't Detective Drake, then it's that mysterious man with the ponytail. Why, I could have sworn I saw you chatting up a firefighter when I first walked in to boot. Back when I was young, we had a word for ladies that spent so much time bouncing from man to man." "Oh, a firefighter?" cooed Bridget. "Don't get excited, it was just Marvin," I said, trying to diffuse any hope Bridget had, as well as any judgment Charlene was harboring. "There wasn't anything going on. He just invited me to some chili cook-off this afternoon." "Oh, the Twistchapel community chili cook-off? Is it that time of year already?" asked Charlene. "I guess," I shrugged. "I should really get more involved with the community if this was an ongoing thing. How was I so out of the loop? Probably something to look into." "You've heard of it?" "Of course," she nodded, nose turning up at the thought. "It's one of my least favorite events of the year." "Why is that?" I asked, sharing a look with Bridget. "It is held in the town square, and I live just a few blocks down from it," said Charlene, shaking her head as she thought about it. "It gets so loud there even as late as 9 p.m. Everyone there causing such a ruckus. I always call in noise complaints to the sheriff's office, but they don't do anything about it. Can you believe it? They always say it's a community-sponsored event and I should just go on down and enjoy the fun. The audacity." "That does sound horrible," I nodded as Bridget giggled. "Poor Charlene. Must be hard to be her." A hand grabbed my shoulder suddenly and firmly, causing me to jump a little in surprise. "We need to talk privately now," said the owner of the hand. I turned around to see Warren Locke, a warlock that occasionally had jobs for me. He had his blonde hair up in a ponytail as usual and wore his typical long coat. I didn't trust him very much, but he did have a habit of bringing me interesting cases to work on. "Looks like I was right," said Charlene, grinning at Bridget and me. Unfortunately, he was also the ponytailed man that Charlene just mentioned. "Can it wait?" I asked Warren, feeling my face turn a light shade of red. There was nothing between us, but he had a bad habit of making people think otherwise with how he acted. I was pretty sure he was doing it intentionally. "It can't," he said, grabbing my hand and leading me towards my office. "This should take only a minute," I said, looking back at the grinning Charlene and the concerned Bridget. "Sure it will," said Charlene, turning back to her register. Warren and I walked into my office, Bart following quickly behind. I walked over to where my chair was behind my desk and glared at Warren. "What's your deal?" I demanded. "You're making me look bad in front of my workers." Warren closed the door and glanced behind me. "Oh wow, you still haven't changed that wallpaper. It's very distracting, you know that?" "I'll get to it when I get to it," I said, glancing back at the ugly 70s floral wallpaper on the wall behind me. I always forgot it was there until a visitor pointed it out. "Charlene is getting the wrong impression of you and me, and I don't want that getting back to Drake. My apologies, but this is something we need to discuss urgently." "And what would that be?" asked Bart, glaring at the warlock. This. The warlock snapped his fingers, and the air above my couch shimmered for a brief second. A portal opened up, dropping a soaking wet dead body onto it. Chapter 2. Oh, said Bart, sniffing at the body. I stared down at the dead woman's body on my office couch. Inside I was a mixture of anger, confusion, and curiosity. I decided to let it all out. Did you kill this woman? I whispered harshly. Why do you have her body? Why? Is it wet? What? Of course I didn't kill her, said Warren, shaking his head. He looked almost offended. Almost. Do you think I'd bring the body of someone I killed to show you like a cat bringing a dead mouse to its owner? No offense, Bart. None taken, shrugged Bart. Why did you bring it here? I asked. My client needs to know why she was murdered and who did it, said Warren. And why do you need my help right this second? I asked. There have been a number of murders in surrounding towns. It's been kept mostly under wraps, but the victims appear to be random. We have no idea how they are being targeted, who the murderer is, and if or when the killer will strike again. Time is of the essence so that more people don't die. I let out a sigh. That wasn't very much to go on. Sounded like solving this could help save people in Twistchapel though, so it was worth trying to help. Who is she? I asked. No one knows. Okay, I said. Less than helpful. Why did you bring her to me instead of taking us to where the body was found? There could be evidence you missed when you took the body. The body was found in the middle of a lake near Ravendale, said Warren. Great, even less helpful. I could take us there right now if you'd like, but I figured you'd prefer this way. I'm good, I nodded, moving up past my desk to take a closer look at the body. The woman appeared to be about my age, with blonde hair and green eyes. She had on a blue blouse and pair of jeans, along with a pair of blue flats. She didn't have on a wedding ring or any jewelry, and there wasn't a purse or any other valuable items. Maybe this was a robbery gone bad and they dumped the body? Wondered Bart aloud, noticing the same things I did. Or the killer just wanted to make it more difficult to identify her, I said, shaking my head. If there has been a string of murders in different towns, I doubt this is just a mugging. The back of her head had a noticeable indent, which was probably how she was killed. Looking down at her neck, I noticed 2 small marks. Look here, I said, pointing at them. Is that the bite of a vampire? Good eye, said Warren, leaning down and examining it closer. It would appear that way. How bizarre. Why is that bizarre? The cause of death was a blunt strike to the back of the head, he said. Oh yeah, a vampire wouldn't die from that, I said slowly, thinking back to a past case dealing with some vampire deaths. Plus, she wouldn't still be here. She should have turned into ash if she died as a vampire. That must mean she died before she turned into one, nodded Warren. Interesting. Very interesting. Good job, Miss Foster. I knew you'd be able to help out. The phone on my desk rang out. Good morning, this is Zoey, I said, leaning over the desk and picking it up. How can I help you? Miss Foster, this is Charlene, one of your cashiers. Yes, Charlene. I'm a bit busy right now. Yes, with that man in the ponytail, said Charlene. That's what I told Detective Drake, but he insisted he needed to talk to you after I mentioned that. I'll just tell him the dash. Wait a second. Detective Drake is here. Yes, ma'am. He is staring at me impatiently as we speak. I smacked my forehead. What was Charlene doing? Tell him it'll be just a minute, but then he can come in, I said, hanging up. Detective Drake is here, smirked Warren. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see me as always. Get rid of the body now, I hissed. Detective Drake Robinson and I had been dating, and while we didn't have any labels yet, things were doing very well. The second to last thing I wanted was for Drake to get paranoid about Warren, and I being in my office alone. Unfortunately, the absolute last thing I wanted was for Drake to find us alone, but also with a dead body. Perhaps he can help us, asked Warren. All the normal humans speak so highly of his work. The doorknob jiggled as Drake began opening the door. Apparently he didn't want to wait a full minute before coming in. Quit playing around and just do it, I begged the warlock. Warren snapped his fingers again as the door opened. In an instant the couch shimmered and became a portal, sucking the body back in. Warren fell backwards onto the couch as the portal closed and Drake entered the room. Impressive, remarked Bart. I hated to admit it, but it was well done. Ah, Detective Drake, smiled Warren, fully stretched out on the couch. What? A surprise. It seems like every time I visit our Zoey you always pop up. Do you have a tracking device hidden somewhere on me? Trust me, Warren, said Drake, glaring down at the warlock. If I was going to put a tracking device on you, you'd know it, and it wouldn't feel good. Always so aggressive, isn't he? Asked Warren as he looked up to me. I don't know why you always want to antagonize the detective, I said, walking over and giving Drake a quick hug. Drake's features softened as he looked down at me, a beautiful smile breaking on his lips. How can I help you, Drake? I had the day off and wanted to see what you were up to, he said, looking around the office before his eyes fell on the couch. Why's the couch all wet? Warren shifted uncomfortably, looking at me to give him an answer. Oh, I spilled some water earlier. It isn't a big deal, I said, eager to change the subject. Do you have off for the chili cook-off? Yeah, actually, nodded Drake, looking suspiciously at the couch for a moment, before turning back to me. They gave most of the office time off to attend. I guess it's supposed to make the community like us more, or something. I'm not going, so it doesn't really bother me. You aren't going? I asked. Why not? I just don't really like the taste of chili, shrugged Drake. Want to catch a movie or something instead? I was planning on going, I said. It'll be good for my business if I spend more time in the public eye, getting to know more people. I was hoping to see you there. I don't know, sighed Drake. It's not really my thing. I might have to pass on this one. Perhaps I'll accompany the lady instead, offered Warren, an amused look on his face. I wondered what it was about Warren that loved poking Drake's buttons so much. On second thought, I'd be happy to go, said Drake, giving Warren a hard stare. Well, that worked out for me. I've got some things to do here before the cook-off, so I'll have to work on the project we discussed tomorrow, if that's okay with you, Warren, I said. Project? Asked Bart. Oh, you mean the dead body project. Got it. I appreciate your help on this, Miss Foster, nodded Warren, getting up to leave. You've already proven to be invaluable as always. I'll think more about it and let you know if I come up with anything, I said. Warren waited for Drake to move out of the doorway. Drake didn't move a muscle. This again, mumbled Warren. What is it with police officers and acting tough, Are you dealing with any particular insecurities? It's always good to talk about these things, you know. Don't want to bottle them up inside. Isn't good for your health. There are a lot of things that aren't good for your health, nodded Drake. Such as continually trying to provoke the detective of a small town. Would be a shame if word got around at the station to be on the lookout for a trouble maker fitting your description. That could prove problematic, nodded Warren, maneuvering his way around the man and opening up the door. Until we meet again, Miss Foster. I smiled as he left, closing the door behind him. Please don't do something morally questionable towards him, I said, moving over to my desk chair. Not that I particularly care about him. I just don't want you to get in trouble. I'd like to think you know me better than to do something like that, said Drake. Of course I do, I smiled. I know he's a pain, but I've got to work with him on some things from time to time. Speaking of which, what sort of stuff is it that you're working on? Asked Drake, raising an eyebrow. Is he also in the grocery business? He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy to go into retail or customer service. No, he doesn't, does he? I trailed off, trying to think of what sort of connection we could have that would make sense to Drake. Unfortunately, we weren't really at the point where I could say I was a witch, and I wasn't sure if that day would ever come. When my mother finally confided that she was a witch to my father, he left, never to be heard from again. Granted, my mother was a piece of work, but the witch thing sure didn't help. Surely you've thought of something by now, purred Bart. Your bodyguard? A therapist? An interior designer? He's an interior designer, I said. Huh, said Bart and Drake in unison. Well, a consulting interior designer, I said, clearing my throat. I've been thinking about changing the look of some parts of my store, maybe giving it a more rustic or homey vibe. Do you really think that's going to work? Asked Bart. No, but I was hoping it would regardless. Drake looked past me to the wall with the floral wallpaper, slowly nodding. I guess I could see a need to change one or two things, he said slowly. Not That you haven't done a great job with most of the store. Most? I said, raising my eyebrows and smirking. Well, I mean, you did say you hired him to help you with some interior designing, and that makes sense, he said quickly, realizing he may have made a mistake. I mean, I think you've done a lovely job, Zoey, but I understand wanting to learn a few things from a professional. Not that you need it. Uh-huh, I said. He looked down at his wristwatch and backed up into the door. Well, since we're going to be down at the chili cook-off later today, I should probably go check on a couple of things. I'll meet you there. Sounds perfect, I said. Drake opened the door and gave a wave goodbye before leaving. I can't believe that worked, said Bart, giving me an impressed look. What can I say? I may be smarter than you thought. Or your boyfriend is just... Chapter 3. A few hours later, I pulled my old car up to a street parallel to the town square. 30 or so table stands were set up across the square, each with large vats containing chili for the hungry masses. Dozens of people milled around sampling the various chili. I spotted the mayor of Twistchapel and other city officials talking with citizens, while firefighters and police officers showed children their respective vehicles. Big crowd, noted Bart. It's a pretty decent size, I agreed, scanning to see if I could find Drake. So, the concept is people make chili and then everyone gets to eat it? For free. Basically. Wait, you don't know what a chili cook-off is? I asked, trying to hide my surprise. Bart seemed to know nearly everything, be it paranormal or not. It was rare to find something out of his range of knowledge. Never seen one before. He shrugged, attempting to look disinterested. I'd be happy to help you out, Bart, I smiled. I can teach you all about that vast Midwest culture that is chili. Isn't that Drake's car? Asked the cat, pointing a paw across the street. Sure enough, Drake stepped out of his car as I looked up. Conversation to be continued, I said, getting out of mine. I closed the door and gave him a wave from across the street. I started to move towards the crosswalk when I saw a flick of movement down an alley near my car. Did you see that? I whispered to Bart, who was just a few steps back. No, said Bart, looking down the alley. It's gonna look suspicious if you stay here any longer, though. You should keep moving unless you want Drake to come over and investigate. Good point, I mumbled, continuing on my way. I spam-clicked the lock on my key fob, hearing the car honk a couple of times. No way was I leaving it unlocked, even if I was just seeing things. Ready to get this over with? Asked Drake as I reached him. Oh, it won't be that bad. I smiled as we walked through the crowd. Maybe you'll even find some chili that you like? It can renew your love for the food. Impossible. Why don't you like chili? Is it too spicy for you? No, it's not that, he said, looking down at a vat of chili nearby. When I was younger, my family didn't have much money. Most of our meals consisted of chili and cornbread, since that was the cheapest thing we could make in bulk. I'm sorry. I didn't know that, I said, placing a hand on his arm. It's nothing to be sorry about. I've just eaten more than enough chili. Growing up, I didn't know your family had financial problems when you were a kid. I said, you don't talk very much about your past. Neither do you, he said, smiling down at me. It's complicated, I said, looking at another chili station. Zoey, you made it. Perfect, a way to change topics. I looked up to see Marvin walking over to us. I told you I would. Marvin, this is Dash. I know Detective Drake, he said, reaching his hand out. Good to see you, Marvin, said Drake, taking his hand and shaking it. Thanks for setting up this event and inviting our department to it. Not a problem, said Marvin. So we all know why you're here. Ready to try my famous chili. I don't know, Dash, began Drake. Of course we are, I said, playfully punching Drake's arm. The detective relented, and we followed Marvin back to his station. The fire department's chili station had 3 vats set up, each with lines much longer than any of the others we had seen so far. Several firefighters were scooping for the hungry guests, while a few others were hanging back, talking amongst themselves. Marvin brought us to the front of the line, bypassing everyone else. Which one is yours? I asked. All of them, he said, picking up pre-prepared cups and handing one to Drake. And me. None of us can compete with Marvin, so we just sit back and let him do all the cooking, laughed one of the serving firefighters. Thanks, Jerry, laughed Marvin. I took a small spoonful and tried the chili. Flavor exploded in my mouth. Had heat but wasn't too spicy. I could taste smoked paprika with just a hint of chocolate. It was possibly the best chili I ever had. Okay, said Drake, taking a bite as well. This is actually very good. Gotta give it up to you. That's high honor coming from Drake, I giggled. I also think it's amazing. Marvin. Thanks, guys, he smiled, before a bald man came up and started talking to him. I glanced down at Bart, feeling bad he couldn't try any. I did a double take, looking a little closer at his mouth. It was a dark shade of purple, unlike the rest of his body, which was its usual translucent blue. What? Asked Bart. Is something wrong? Drake was right next to me, enjoying his chili, so I couldn't say anything. Wiped my chin with my hand, hoping he'd get the idea. Your chin itches? Something wrong? Asked Drake as I let out a frustrated sigh. Nope. Just enjoying this chili, I said, taking another bite. Sorry guys, but I've got to start sampling the competitor's chili, said Marvin, breaking away from the bald man. We all have to judge each other's. No problem, I smiled. Thanks for giving us the VIP experience. As Marvin left us with the bald man, an elderly woman approached Drake, asking him to help her find her car. Yes ma'am, I'd be happy to help, he said, looking back at me apologetically. I'll catch up with you later, I smiled. Looks like he didn't quite have the day off like he thought he did. He nodded and followed after the woman, who zigzagged through the crowd. I glanced back down at Bart, who was licking his paw. Hey, I whispered. What's up with your face? Like you're one to talk, he shot back. No, I mean, why's it purple all of a sudden? It is, he asked, wiping it with a paw. Oh, that's some of Marvin's chili. What? How? Everyone seemed to really like it, so I floated over to the vat at the end. When the firefighter on scooping duty was distracted talking to a pretty girl, I stuck my head in, materialized for a second, and then popped back out with some chili before anyone noticed. I looked over at the far vat, and watched as a customer walked away, taking a bite. They stopped walking and reached up to their mouth, slowly pulling a long cat hair out and looking at it in confusion. Gross, I mumbled. Let's check out some other chili, and this time don't get your hair in it. I'm not promising anything, purred Bart, trotting behind me. We went from booth to booth, trying out various chili that had smaller lines. A few were pretty good but had nothing on Marvin's. While all the chili servers had on different outfits, they were all wearing aprons and gloves. We approached another station, this one decorated with various plants. A woman stood behind the vat, smiling at me. Her name tag read Mary Wrigley. Hi Mary, I'm Zoe. Does yours have plants and herbs in it? I asked, taking a sample. It does, she exclaimed. I'm so happy that you got my theme. Most people just take the sample and walk away. I took a bite, which had a strange flavor profile. I saw there were small cut purple flowers in mine, but I couldn't place the flavor. It wasn't bad, just different. Zoe, said Bart, this lady might be a witch. I raised an eyebrow down at him. Why would he think that? Behind her to your left, she's got a jar containing wolfsbane. It's the kind of plant witches used to mix into their potions, he said. I looked Mary over. She had her black hair tied up in a messy bun, and her green apron was covered with flour and chili residue. The woman seemed a little odd, but wasn't giving me any signs that she could hear Bart. Could be interesting to talk to a fellow witch if she actually was one. Is that wolfsbane? I asked, gesturing to the jar Bart pointed out. Mary squealed in delight, turning around and grabbing the jar to show me. A fellow plant lover. It is indeed. I normally just show this to kids, but maybe you'll appreciate it too. The purple plant was curved at the top and opened up towards the bottom. I'd never seen it before, but it was a pretty flower. I've never seen that around Twistchapel before, I noted. You wouldn't, she said, shaking her head. I'm from Newport, about an hour south of here, and these plants aren't native to this environment. Oh, you like to collect plants? I asked. In a way. I'm actually a botanist by trade, so it's my job to look after various plants and study them. That explained why she had it. Maybe not a witch then. One of the reasons I like to come to these chili cook-offs is to show people that there are more to plants than they think. From plants that can be used as ingredients in food down to plants like these that can kill you. I chalked on my next spoonful. Kill you? I asked, staring down at my chili again in horror. Had I eaten enough to be poisoned? Don't worry, she laughed, putting the jar back behind her. The flower in your chili is lilac, not wolfsbane. Good to know. I smiled, relaxing some. I didn't think learning what other deadly plant she had would make me feel better. Thanks for the chili. We walked through a few more stations, occasionally skipping some whose lines were too long. With so many options to choose from, I wasn't going to wait around all day just for one. At one of the stations, I finally found a chili that nearly rivaled Marvin's. Nearly. This is probably the second best chili I've had, I said, looking down at the scooper's name. It read John Lorden. John had on a pair of glasses and was balding but trying to fight it. Long strands of hair laid over the top of his head in an attempt to look like a full head of hair. It wasn't working. He had on a pure white apron which looked like food never hit it. Second best, he said, nose twisting. And who would have the best? Marvin, the firefighters, I said. I didn't expect him to get so angry at a compliment. Of course it's Marvin's, he said, slamming his fist on the table. This seems to be going well, said Bart, smiling up at me. Do you guys know each other? I asked. Of course we do, shouted John, even though he was just a foot away from me. He beats me at every one of these blasted cook-offs. I'm sorry, I said. Is it really that big of a deal though? Aren't these supposed to be community events? I'm not even from here. I'm from Ravendale, he said, ripping his apron off and storming away. Yeesh, said Bart. Who peed in his chili? Hopefully no one, I said, glancing down at my cup. We moved along to the last of the stands that I hadn't checked out yet. A man stood behind his vat of chili, patiently looking around as people walked by. He had brown hair and brown eyes, and had on a blue apron with some chili splotches. Hi there, I smiled, extending out my hand. My name's Zoey Foster. The man looked down at my hand for a second, before ultimately shaking it. The name's Lucas Stoddard. I appreciate it, but I'm married. I'm sorry, I asked, confused by what he meant. Look, Miss Foster, I appreciate the compliment of trying to chat me up, because you think I'm attractive, but I'm married, he said, holding up his left hand to show me his ring. He thinks you're hitting on him, howled Bart with laughter. The cat clutched his side and rolled on the ground. And no, I said, feeling my face turn red as ever. I was just trying to introduce myself to be friendly, not because It's okay, Miss Foster. It happens all the time. I figured I'd just drop it. Did he think every woman approaching his station today was hitting on him? Lucas handed me a cup of pre-prepared chili, adding, Here you are, Spring Hill's finest chili. Oh, you're from Spring Hill? I asked, taking the chili. I hadn't been to that town in years. So many people from different towns are here, I'm pretty surprised. Yes, several of us like to hit up as many of these events as we can, he nodded. It's nice to see a bunch of neighboring towns and try a lot of good cooking. That's a good idea, I nodded, taking a bite of the chili. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything special. Thanks for the dash. Someone help, cried a woman. Medic, shouted a man at the same time. Without pausing to think, I left Lucas and ran towards the sound of the shouts. People all around stopped what they were doing, turning to look in the direction of the panicked voices. As I hopped past a group of stunned onlookers, I ran face first into John Lorden and fell to the ground. Watch it, grunted John, continuing by me, away from the commotion. That guy is a tool, hissed Bart, glaring up as the man walked away. Yeah, I said, getting back to my feet and hurrying off to the cries. Everyone stay back, medical help will be here in just a moment, came Drake's voice. I pushed past the crowd up to Drake, who was crouched over a man lying flat on his back. What's going on, Drake? I asked. Zoey, you should probably hang back, he said, not looking at me. Who is? Oh my gosh, I exclaimed, seeing the man's face for the first time. It was Marvin. Chapter 4. What happened to him? I asked, trying to soak in all the details I could of the scene. In his outstretched hand were a few stacks of used chili cups, but other than that nothing seemed noteworthy. We're going to try to figure that out, said Drake as a few EMTs and police officers joined him. I'm going to have to stay and work on this. It's probably best if you leave, to be honest. Is he alive? I whispered. Drake shook his head. I checked the pulse when I first arrived. I'm sorry, Zoey, I nodded solemnly. I didn't know Marvin very well, but it was still horrible. That he died. Was it an allergic reaction to something in the chili? Was it an accident, or something more sinister? I'll head back to work. Let me know if you find anything out. Of course, he nodded. The police are going to question everyone here to see if there are any inconsistencies or things that pop out to us. I'll probably have to ask you some questions later, but I'm confident you had nothing to do with this. I understand, I nodded. I didn't mind answering questions. Poor Marvin. His wife was probably here with him, and would be told the devastating news soon. Bart and I left the scene heading back for my car. You don't want to try and figure this out? Asked Bart. There probably isn't anything to figure out, I said. There's a million reasons he could have died right then. It's unfortunate, but it doesn't mean it was murder. There's only one way to make sure of that. Not this time, I said, checking both ways before crossing the street. There are medical professionals working on him. They'll eventually figure out what caused it. If there is something fishy going on, I'm sure Drake will mention to me later. We can investigate it then. If you say so, sighed Bart. Shame Marvin died. His chili was delicious. As we walked past the alley to my car, a metal trash can clanged on the ground as it fell over. You heard that, right? I whispered. Obviously, said Bart, trying to see down the alley. We should just keep going. It's creeping me out. It was creeping me out too, but I had a feeling whatever was down there was trying to get my attention. Taking a deep breath, I summoned a ball of light to my hands and walked down the dark alley. Bart hesitated but followed after me. The alley was lined with dumpsters, giant pieces of old furniture, and other clutter. Even though it was light out, the buildings on each side of the alley cast surprisingly dark shadows. Hello, called out. Is someone there? We waited a beat, but there wasn't any more sound. Well, guess it was nothing, said Bart quickly. Let's get back to the dash. I turned around to see what caused him to stop talking, and saw a giant wolf blocking the way we came. I shone the light in the direction of the wolf, which seemed oddly familiar. Do I know you? I asked. The wolf began to shift, standing up on two legs and wearing a long black coat. The man looked down at the light in my hand and gestured at it. Could you put that out? He asked. It's best if no one knows I'm here. That'll bring attention if someone walks by. Could you try sending me a text or something like a normal person next time? I asked, putting out the light. I didn't even know you were in town, Derek. Derek, which was probably not his real name, was the first werewolf I ever met. I helped out a mutual friend who had been wrongly accused of a murder, and Derek provided some important information with the case. He worked with a group of werewolves and helped provide training for new ones, which meant he was always moving from town to town. I only carry burner phones, he said, and I'm not going to memorize your number. It's safer this way. If you say so, I shrugged. What brings you to this creepy alley? My organization has sent me out to find a murderer, said Derek simply. And you think Zoey is one? Asked Bart. Of course not, he said. Unfortunately, I don't know who it is. We found a body. Oh, I said, thinking back to my earlier visit with Warren. I'm already working on this case with Warren Locke. Your group must have contacted him to help solve it. You're working with Warren? Barked Derek with laughter. That guy is the worst. Sure, he accomplishes the job, but then he practically robs you blind with his charges. Besides, it's better to keep things as in-house as possible. We haven't contracted out work to anyone, let alone Warren Locke, in years. I mean, he's not my favorite person to work with, I agreed. Surely this is the same case, though. The body that was found in Ravendale. Ravendale, said Derek, raising an eyebrow. There was a body found there? Yes, wait, where was your body found? Spring Hill, he grunted. Interesting, I said. Was the victim killed with a bash to the back of the head? Derek shook his head. It was a fellow werewolf, we can't be killed by that. No, he was found with a silver sword stuck in his back. Seemed like the poor guy never saw it coming. How did people find him? The first people on the scene said they heard a woman scream, but by the time they got there, she was nowhere to be seen. Must have been an angel, I nodded. Possibly. It's also possible the killer is a woman, and then screamed to cover up that she was the one that did it. Angels don't always have to appear. When someone paranormal kills or is killed. Still, why come to Twistchapel? Asked Bart. Did the werewolf have ties here? No, said Derek. The man that was killed, Ned McFinn, was part of a chili cook-off in Spring Hill. Since there was one happening so soon after in Twistchapel, we thought it would be best to send someone out to watch the event. I don't believe it's a coincidence that another person died. Was Marvin a werewolf? I asked. Not to my knowledge. It's possible he was bitten by one without anyone knowing, but it was a full moon a few nights ago. There would have been reports of something strange going on here. Do you have any particular suspects? I asked. I wasn't sure if I thought the killer of the werewolf was also here. Just having the chili cook-off being the only connection seemed like quite a stretch, especially with the murder methods. I didn't see a weapon or any sort of stab marks on Marvin. If he was murdered, it was in a more subtle way. Here, said Derek, pulling out a crumpled up piece of paper and handing it over to me. This is a list of the people who were at the Spring Hill cook-off a few days ago. I scanned through the list, seeing if any names jumped out at me. Lucas Stoddard, John Lorden, Mary Wrigley. I talked to all three of them here today, I said. Not surprising, nodded Derek. A lot of people do these chili cook-offs in neighboring towns. It makes it more difficult to narrow down the suspects. Any thoughts on the three you recognized? Lucas was a little weird, but he was also with me when Marvin died. Mary admitted to having several deadly plants with her, even showing me them. John was the most aggressive. And actually I bumped into him while he was walking away from Marvin's body. Thought Derek. Would John be so obvious about killing somebody? Though, I don't know, I shrugged. To be honest, I had just brief conversation with them. I wouldn't feel comfortable accusing any particular person without investigating it further. You should do that, nodded Derek. The police are talking to everyone right now though, I said, shaking my head. There's no need for me to get involved. They aren't you, Zoe, said Derek. If there is something connected with the paranormal, the regular humans may overlook something or not piece it together. I normally wouldn't ask for an outsider's help, but you've proven yourself an ally of my people. I thought about it for a minute. I wasn't as sure as he was, but maybe it wouldn't hurt to stick around. Hopefully this was related to the case that Warren was working on, and then I could get him out of my hair faster than I thought. I didn't want the warlock to drop another dead body on my couch, because I had missed important clues here. Do you have any contacts you can check with in Ravendale? I asked. It's probably nothing, but I have this feeling that the body found there could somehow be related. Ravendale? Sure, I have some contacts. I wouldn't get my hopes up if I were you though. Why's that? Asked Bart. Ravendale didn't report any deaths associated with their cook-off. Shrugged Derek. If my hunch is correct, then there probably isn't a relation. He could be right, but maybe they'd unearthed something Warren and I didn't know yet. Okay, still check with them if you wouldn't mind. Maybe something could still come of it. It's not impossible that a murderer would get bored in between the cook-offs and find another target. Not a problem, nodded Derek. I'll get on that right away and try to catch back up with you in the next couple of hours. If we can't figure this out before all the suspects leave, then the killer will probably strike again. People are counting on you. I nodded but wasn't very confident. There wasn't any guarantee that someone killed Marvin. He was such a well-liked guy. Why would someone choose to kill him? They could also end up getting away with it if they never kill again, added Bart, as if he could read my inner thoughts. Would you really be able to live with that, Zoe? Okay, enough with the guilt tripping, I grumbled. We'll stay here and see what we can do. Please hurry back with any information you learn from Ravendale. Maybe your contacts figure something out that Warren and his contractors haven't yet. Derek nodded, shifting back into a wolf. He dashed by us much faster than I expected him to, and disappeared at the end of the alley. Think we'll be able to figure it out? Asked Bart. Only one way to find out, I said, walking back down the alley the way we came. I was going to talk more with the three names I recognized on the list, but that wasn't going to be all. His wife might have information, or the other firefighters. Anyone could have done it, but I had only a short list of motives. Come on. We've got quite a few people to talk to before Derek gets back. Chapter 5. Bart and I made our way back into the crowd. To my surprise, most people continued on with the cook-off. I assumed the event would have been cancelled, or a large percent of people leave, but apparently I was wrong. After seeing Marvin lying on the ground, I had lost my appetite. I made a beeline for Marvin's chili station. Luckily, most of the firefighters were still there, no longer joking around with smiles on their faces. The 3 men sitting behind the scooper sat quietly and looked at the ground. The shift for scooping must have ended, and the previous group hanging back now took the lead of helping hungry customers to Marvin's last batch of chili. "Hey guys," I said as I walked up to them. "I'm so sorry about your loss. Didn't know Marvin incredibly well, but he was always very friendly to me." "Thanks," nodded the man on the left. "I can't believe he's gone," muttered the firefighter that talked with Marvin earlier. I remembered his name was Jerry. "I don't mean to come across as rude by asking questions so soon after, but it looks like there's the possibility this wasn't an accident," I said. "What do you mean?" asked the third man. "You think someone's responsible for this? You think someone killed Marvin?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "Was there anyone that would want to cause Marvin harm? Anyone that disagreed with him at work?" "No," said the first man, shaking his head. "Marvin was always cooking for us and helping out around the station. The guy always went above and beyond for us and was very agreeable. Never heard someone mention him in a bad light." "It's true," said the other. "He even would take leftovers to the police station and occasionally other businesses. I can't imagine someone in Twistchapel wanting him dead." It sounded like Marvin went above and beyond for everyone. Even back at school, everyone talked highly about him, from the teachers down to the students. Why would someone want to kill him if he was always helping? This would be so much easier if he had some enemies. "What about some of your rescues?" I asked. "I know we don't have too many fires in town, but surely you guys have lost a few civilians. Are there any family members that were angry with the fire department, or even Marvin himself, over not being able to save people in time?" "We haven't lost anyone to a fire since before Marvin was hired 8 years ago," said Jerry. "That's a high success rate," noted an impressed Bart. "Seriously?" I asked. Thinking about it, I couldn't recall the last time I heard a news story about someone dying in a fire in town. The last one must have been Jenny Fairfax, and that one wasn't an accident. "That's incredible." "It wasn't a coincidence either," added Jerry. "What do you mean?" "He means Marvin is a big reason why no one has died," barked the third man. He stood up and stormed away into the crowd. "I'm sorry," I said to the remaining 2. Maybe I was asking too many questions too close to the death of their friend. "Don't worry about it," said the first man, shaking his head. "Terrence has always been a bit emotional. Like we've been saying, Marvin was a great guy. It's really hard to lose him. Anyway, we all believe Marvin was why the number of deaths and fires dropped to 0. He was the fastest of us and would put himself in dangerous situations if it meant saving a person's life." "I didn't know that," I said. "Marvin was really humble," said Jerry. "He never wanted the credit or thanks as an individual, but always wanted the fire department as a whole to get the credit. Some of the stuff I saw him do was incredible, though. Like out of this world kind of incredible." "Out of this world?" I asked, glancing down at Bart. "Yeah," nodded Jerry enthusiastically. "One time it was just the 2 of us on Dash." "Not this again," said the first man, putting a hand on Jerry's shoulder. "Don't tarnish Marvin's legacy with your crazy stories." Jerry looked down at the ground, going quiet again. "I'd like to hear it," I said. "Was there more to Marvin than I thought?" "It's just that story of a man that saw things in the smoke and flames." "Nothing to tell," replied the man. I looked at Jerry again, who wouldn't meet my eye. There seemed to be something more here, but it didn't seem like I'd be getting it out of him right this minute. "Is Marvin's wife here?" I asked. The man nodded. "One of our guys went and picked her up. Last I heard, she was by where Marvin was found. She's a strong woman, but be careful if you've got any questions to ask her." "I will," I said. "Thanks for your help, guys. Tell Terrence I'm sorry if I angered him." "Best of luck with your investigation," said the man. "I don't foresee it panning out for you, though. Just don't see why someone would want the man dead." "I hope you're right," I said, leaving to go find Marvin's wife. "That discussion was a little odd," said Bart as we made our way back through the crowd. The place seemed to be getting busier as time went on. I wondered if it was because the news stations had probably picked up on Marvin's death by now, which then caused people to come down and see the scene for themselves. I'm interested to hear what Jerry was trying to say, I agreed. I'll have to try and talk to him later. Not just that, but the way Terrence stormed off. They did say he was emotional, I said, stopping as a pair of kids nearly ran into me. Maybe that was it. Or maybe he didn't like you snooping around, asked Bart. True, I nodded. We continued until we came back to the place where Marvin was found. An ambulance had driven onto the lawn, and several men were loading a black bag on a stretcher into it. A woman with blonde curly hair sat on her knees, staring at them. She had draped around her shoulders a firefighter's jacket, and seemed almost like she was in a trance. That must be Marvin's wife. Hi, miss, I said, struggling to sit down next to her. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, said the woman stoically. I went to school with Marvin, I said, reaching my hand out. My name's Zoey. Zoey Foster. Nicole, she said absently. I dropped my hand after it became clear she didn't see it offered to her. She continued to stare at the ambulance as they finished loading Marvin in it. They started the vehicle back up and began to drive away. I'm sure you don't want to talk right now, but would it be okay if I asked you a couple of questions? I asked. Go ahead. Is there anyone you could think of that would want him dead? I asked. Nicole watched the ambulance disappear for a moment, before she turned and looked at me for the first time. Want him dead? What do you mean? She asked. I mean, did he have any enemies? People that might wish him ill? Why? You think someone murdered him? She asked, eyes widening. Maybe you shouldn't lead with such a strong question when talking to a widow, offered Bart. He was probably right, but it was too late now. It's a possibility, I nodded. Can you think of anyone that would want him dead? Nicole thought about it for a moment. I don't believe so. Are there any people that would benefit from him dying? I asked. How would someone benefit from his death? She asked. You mean financially? I suppose you could argue I would benefit from life insurance. Am I a suspect now? I'm not saying that, I said. The spouse usually is a top suspect, but there wasn't any reason to mention that to her. I heard people came to your house to pick you up, is that true? It is, she nodded. That would make it harder for you to be the one who killed him then. Assuming anyone killed him. Was he allergic to anything? He was lactose intolerant, but that was it, she said. He was so invested in these chili cook-offs, it would be hard to be very involved if you were allergic to very much. I'm not very familiar with how this works, I admitted. Are all the cooks judges as well? They are. Everyone goes around to try the various chili, and then about halfway through the day they all vote on the best one. You aren't allowed to vote for your own chili to make it fair. Is that the way it works at all the cook-offs? I asked. She nodded. That was good to know. If someone wanted to kill him, they would know Marvin would be trying the chili from all the other competitors, said Bart. I was thinking the same thing. That would also explain why no one else had gotten sick or died. The cook could be serving their regular chili, and then when Marvin came by to sample the killer's chili, they could hand him a pre-made deadly version. I've heard that there are various cook-offs in the surrounding towns. I continued. Would you typically go with him? Occasionally. The spouses are welcome to come with, but most don't go to every single one. It gets a bit boring, to be honest. Maybe I should have gone to this one. Maybe if I was here Nicole broke down, sobbing into her hands. I put an arm around her, unsure of how best to comfort her. Couldn't imagine what she was going through, but getting asked all these questions afterward couldn't be easy. Zoey? Asked a man's voice. I looked up to see Drake staring down at us with a raised eyebrow. Hi, I smiled back sheepishly. I thought I told you to leave, he said, motioning for a policewoman nearby to comfort Nicole. Last time I checked, I was allowed to be here if I wanted to, I said, letting go of Nicole as the other woman crouched down. I tried to stand up confidently, but stumbled into Drake's chest. So you decided to come back and make Marvin's wife cry? He asked, catching me. I know. Obviously I didn't meant to do that, I said defensively, pushing back from him. So why are you here? I thought I'd look around, ask some questions, I said, trying to sound Nonchalant. Questions, he said. Practically the whole police department is here doing that. Are you saying you don't think we can do this on our own? I never said that, I said, lifting my hands up. I just thought what happened to Marvin looked suspicious, and there were some people that I wanted to talk to about it. Why don't you share with me what you know then, he said, since you have full faith in us. I also never said that, I smiled. Obviously, I think you'll be able to figure it out. I just think time is of the essence, and I wanted to make sure it gets done quickly. So we're competent, just slow, he chuckled. Your words, not mine. You're not withholding pertinent information from the police, are you? He asked. I thought about what all I could share. If I shared information with him, maybe he'd share what they have with me. I couldn't tell him I knew about the other mysterious murders in other towns, since he might not even know about them yet. Even if he did, he would wonder how I got that information. He would be even more suspicious if he knew I had the list of Spring Hill's cook-off participants in my pocket. Probably wasn't worth it to share what I knew, even if it was all small. Of course not, I smiled, backing away. I had several more people to talk to before the event was over, and should get back to it. Best of luck catching the killer. There's not always a killer involved, you know, he said, shaking his head. I guess we're about to find out, I said, merging back in with the crowd. Chapter 6. Why don't you want to tell him what you know? Asked Bart, following me to the next person to question. The police might know more than you do right now. They might, I shrugged. But it isn't worth all the follow-up questions he would have for me. It's for the best if he doesn't know about Derek. If you say so, said Bart. What, you think it would go well if I said I had a werewolf contact giving me the inside scoop? I asked. A woman in the crowd gave me a weird look. Should probably keep my voice a little lower. Not in those words, he said. Bridget seemed to take you being a witch pretty well. Maybe it would be okay to eventually tell Drake. You were the one that swore me to secrecy about it in the first place. Whispered back. I did, because it historically ends up getting people killed. Also, the agents of the other don't like humans knowing about their business. Maybe. Times are changing, though. Besides, if you are actually wanting to have a long-term relationship with this guy, it's bound to come up. I thought back to when my father left after my mother told him the truth. He was so angry, so confused. If she never told him, maybe he would have stayed. Couldn't risk destroying any sort of relationship I could have with Drake. Could go worse than just him leaving too. Perhaps I'd end up in an insane asylum or a secret government facility. Bridget is an exception, I mumbled. Possibly, agreed Bart. It's your call on the matter. I'm fine with no one else ever knowing. The next person I wanted to talk to was Lucas Stoddard, the married man. Didn't have much to go on besides the fact that he was at the previous chili cook-off, but it was better than nothing. When we arrived, we found Lucas talking with a bald man. That guy looks familiar, said Bart. As we got closer, the two men stopped talking and smiled in our direction. The cat was right. The bald man was the one we saw at Marvin's chili station when he brought Drake and I there a few hours ago. You were talking with Marvin earlier, weren't you? I asked. Yes, ma'am, nodded the man. I remember he brought you and the detective up to the front of the line. Your name was Zoey, if I'm not mistaken? I'm Chad Buchanan. Nice to meet you, Chad, I said. How did you know Marvin? I'm one of the chili cooks here, and had made friends with him long ago. He's got such a skill at detecting various ingredients in dishes, so I've always made it a point to accompany him as we judge. Were you there when he died? I asked. This could be helpful in figuring out what killed him. I was, unfortunately. I was just telling Lucas about it. There was nothing I could do but shout out for help, said Chad, staring off into the distance as the scene played before his eyes again. Poor Marvin never got a chance to vote before he passed, said Lucas, shaking his head. Didn't even get to try all the chili. He didn't try them all? I asked. No, said Chad. We always build up a collection of the top contenders, try them, and then move on to some of the newcomers. They rarely are that good, so we prefer to start with the best. Which ones did you have? Marvin's and mine, Lucas, Mary's and John's, Chad shrugged. Normally, there are more to choose from, but most of the old guard didn't make it out this time. If the killer poisoned the chili, that must have meant it was one of those Wouldn't have been his own chili obviously, so that narrowed down the suspects to the 3 I already had, plus Chad. What was the order you ate them in? I asked. Now let me think, he said, rubbing his hand through his non-existent hair. I believe it went John, Lucas, Marvin, Mary, and finally mine. Why do you ask? To be honest, I think Marvin might have been murdered. Murdered? Asked Lucas. But why? I'm sorry, miss, but I find that very hard to believe, said Chad. Everyone loved Marvin. That's what I keep hearing, I muttered. Finding the motive is turning out to be very difficult. Well, I could see someone wanting to kill him, shrugged Lucas. Really? Chad and I said at the same time. Of course. He's won nearly all the chili competitions since I can remember, said Lucas. Maybe someone or a group of people decided that enough was enough and they decided to take him out. That way they could win. What does the winner get as a prize? I asked. A certificate, said Chad. That's it? No prize money or something like that. We make chili for the love of it. Why would we need to win money for doing something we love? Asked Lucas. How lame is that? Asked Bart. They go through all of this effort to win, and they don't even get anything for it. I shot Bart a quick look. Even though we didn't think the certificate was that important, maybe these people did. Even so, did they really think it was so important that they would kill over it? I suppose that since you think there was a murder, that the method was poison? Asked Chad. I nodded. It's what makes the most sense at the moment. And since the last chili he tried was mine, I suppose you now believe me to be the killer. I hesitated. I didn't have much to go on, but that was the way I was thinking. He was with Marvin since I last saw him, and was there when he died. He easily could have slipped something in the victim's chili without Marvin noticing, or could have already prepared a deadly mixture to give to him beforehand. Since it was normal for the two of them to taste test together, Chad would have had plenty of time to plan this out. I'll take your non-answer as a yes, he nodded solemnly. Very well. I should really get back to my station, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about Marvin's final moments. That is, if you think you can trust my words. You're a pro at this, Zoey, said Bart sarcastically. Were there any symptoms that Marvin had before he died? I asked. I felt horribly awkward questioning someone who knew I thought they were the killer. But I had to get these questions answered. Marvin needed justice. Anything out of the ordinary. As I told Lucas, after eating a bite of my chili, he started to feel sick. He started gagging like he was going to throw up, and I tried to get him to sit down. Shortly after, he started to complain how spicy the chili was. I thought he was crazy, said Chad, shaking his head. Why's that? I asked. None of the chili we had was spicy at all, said Chad, running his hand over his head again. He kept complaining about how his mouth felt like it was on fire. After maybe a minute of complaining, he collapsed. That sounds horrible. It was, he nodded. Chad pulled out his phone to look at the time. I really need to get going. Anything else you'd like to ask the killer before he leaves? Surely you see where I'm coming from, I said. I do, he nodded. But I'm innocent. I know there isn't any way for me to prove that to you, but I am. I've already talked to the actual police and they didn't arrest me. Anyway, I've got to get going. Feel free to come accuse me by my station if you get bored. Chad walked away before I could say anything else. It was probably for the best. For some reason I wanted to believe that he wasn't the one who killed Marvin, but it was all very suspicious. I glanced back to Lucas. That was rough, he said. Yeah, I agreed. I changed the subject. Are you a full-time cook? No way, he laughed. I love making chili, but I love my actual job even more. What do you do for work? I asked. I'm a construction worker, he smiled. Been working for Parker's Construction for nearly 20 years now. We work on commercial and residential properties, and we've helped build nearly a third of the buildings in Spring Hill. Very impressive, I said. It sounds like you really love it. Absolutely, he nodded. My wife doesn't like all the hours I have to work, but she can't really complain when she sees the paycheck. Where is your wife, by the way? I asked. She didn't want to make the trek out to Twistchapel, he said, a bit of annoyance in his voice. She's always asking me to take her to new places, but then doesn't want to come when the cook-offs take me there. Twistchapel isn't very far from Spring Hill. Maybe she didn't feel like it was extravagant enough. I offered. Probably not, he said, shaking his head. She was more than happy to go to Ravendale with me, though. Don't understand that woman sometimes. Ravendale had a cook-off? Yup, he said. I've never been much of a fan of the place, but my wife really liked it. Hoped it would make her want to come to other cook-offs, but it didn't work out that way. Speaking of other cook-offs, I heard a rumor that a man involved in the Spring Hill one died, I said. You're from there, right? Did you know the man? Who died? Ned McFinn? He was a good man. Shame he died. Such a bizarre way, I added. Yeah, a sword through the back, said Lucas, shaking his head in disbelief. You think to worry about guns and bombs when all of a sudden you find out people are dying by swords and poison. It's like we reverted back to the Middle Ages, huh? It's a crazy world we live in, I agreed. Maybe people will start believing in werewolves and vampires again, he said. All those monsters that go after innocent, regular people. Well, they weren't all bad, I said. The majority of the werewolves and vampires I had actually met were very friendly. You ever hear a story with them as the good guys? He scoffed. Doesn't happen. I shrugged non-committally. There wasn't much of a point in arguing over what he would think of as fairy tales or urban legends. Anyway, it was nice talking to you, but I need to finish handing out samples of this chili, Lucas said, taking up his ladle again and pouring into cups. Once I run out, I think I'm just going to head home. I don't care about winning this anymore. You don't. After what happened to Ned, and now Marvin, I think I'm done with these cook-offs for a while, he said, hanging his head low. This was meant to be a fun time to bring people together. I'm sorry, Lucas, I said. Is there anything I can do to help? Lucas straightened up and took a step back. I appreciate your proposition, miss, but again, I'm married. I didn't mean like that, I said, my face radiating heat again. I just turn around and leave, Zoey, laughed Bart. You're not going to be able to get out of this any other way. Thanks for your help, I said, rushing away and covering my face with my hands. Smooth talking as always, chuckled Bart. Oh, shut it. Chapter 7. Resolved to not have an encounter like that again, I went in search of Mary Wrigley. On my way over to her station, I heard a familiar voice through the crowd. And another thing, why can't this be just a 2-hour-long event during the middle of the day? That way it wouldn't bother anyone. Charlene, I asked, seeing an older woman yelling at a police officer. The man looked like he would rather be anywhere but there. Was that her? Somehow, the woman heard me through the crowd and locked eyes with me. She threw up her arms and stomped over to me. The police officer let loose a sigh of relief and walked away. Lucky. Miss Foster, can you believe the noise level here? Asked Charlene. Are you already trying to sleep? I asked, checking my phone. It was hardly after 6 and the sun wasn't down. Oh, I'm not trying to sleep yet. I know this song and dance, though. But don't make it known that the rest of the community won't stand for this event, lasting into the late hours of the night. Then they'll never stop. I've never seen so many useless policemen standing around not asking people to lower their voices. There's no reason for it at all. I have a feeling she doesn't get invited to many parties, mumbled Bart. I'm sorry if you find the cook-off to be too loud, but I don't think it will be going on for much longer, I said. Oh, goody, she exclaimed, a smile almost breaking across her face. Before it could happen, however, her eyes narrowed and focused on me. Wait a minute. Why do you say that? You're not in charge of this event. Are you just like the police officers trying to calm me down with lies? No, I said. I didn't blame the officers for trying to get her out of there. Here. One of the cook-off competitors died. Really? Asked Charlene, placing a hand over her heart and eyes widening. Would I know who it was? Maybe, I shrugged. Marvin Novak, he was a dash. The firefighter, she said, finished. You knew him. I always try to get to know our customers, while our upper management doesn't seem to think that customer service matters. I've always been of the mind that if your customers are happy, they will want to keep coming back and shopping with us. Management would probably understand that if they bothered to be with the customers from time to time. Charlene, I know you're obviously referring to me. Marvin was a great customer, she continued, ignoring me. He was a bit Chatty, mind you, always wanting to see how we were doing. It was nice of him, but it caused the lines to slow down. You know how I can't stand it when people are so chatty. Clearly, I said, glancing down at Bart. The cat listened to Charlene with a mixture of annoyance and awe on his face. The hypocrisy of listening to someone drone on about how they don't like people who talk a lot was truly something to behold. Must say I'm surprised to hear that he passed away, she finished. He was relatively young for something like that to happen. What killed him, if you don't mind me asking? No one knows yet. Ah, that would be why you're still here then, isn't it? Why do you say that? I asked, confused. You've always got to run around and do your investigating, don't you? Asked Charlene. I don't know what's gotten into you in the past year, but you've really gotten into the habit of looking into other people's business. Some people would call that being quite nosy, you know? You know I've helped solve several crimes, right? I said defensively. Maybe I was taking more of an active interest in events than I used to, but it wasn't without some positives coming out of it. Have you? She asked. I don't pay much attention to it. Not for me. She's too busy taking note of everything people do wrong to notice when people do things right, added Bart. I should be off, continued Charlene. I've got some reading to do before I finally attempt to get some sleep tonight. Who knows how that will go if this party keeps on going? You'd think that someone dying would scare people off, but it doesn't appear to have made much of a difference. See you at the store tomorrow, I said, thankful to have the rest of the evening Charlene free. The woman didn't respond as she shouted at people to get out of her way, trying to exit the crowd. One of these days she's going to need your help, and I don't think you should give it to her, said Bart. Of course I would help Charlene if she needed it, I said, continuing on my way past several chili stations. She means well. Does she? Most of the time. Well, some of the time at least. We finally made it to Mary's station, where she was helping a few people to samples of her chili. I waited off to the side for her to finish serving before walking up to her. Hi, Mary. I smiled. Remember me? Absolutely, she smiled back. How are you enjoying the cook-off, Zoey? I was enjoying it very much before Marvin died. I heard, she said, a frown on her face. What a terrible thing to happen to such a nice man. I wish I was there. Maybe there were some herbs I could have used to help him. If only, I nodded. I wasn't sure if there was something she could have done, but maybe she could have helped, if she wasn't the one who poisoned him in the first place, that is. Have you been to any other chili cook-offs before? Of course, said Mary. I love going to these. Did it ever bother you that Marvin always won these competitions? I asked. Honestly, not really, shrugged Mary. Didn't you want to win, though? I pressed. Why enter multiple of these competitions if you didn't want to win at all? I would have been happy to win, but it wasn't why I do these. My real purpose is to introduce people to using different plants and herbs in their daily life. Many people don't think to add lilac to their cooking, for example, but after having a taste of my chili, they might be inspired to start using some in an occasional dish at home. That seemed consistent with what we knew about Mary so far. However, she still had that deadly plant with her. Could I take a look at your wolfsbane again? Of course, she smiled, turning around and grabbing the jar. Mind if I hold it? I asked. No problem, she said, reaching it out to me. Be very careful with it. Taking hold of the jar, I turned it over slowly to see if there was anything out of the ordinary I could see. There looked to be the same amount of flowers as before, and the jar looked exactly like it was when we first saw it. I guess I was wrong, I mumbled. Wrong about what, dear? Asked Mary. I thought this might have been the culprit, I exclaimed, the jar slipping from my hands as I tried to hand it back to the botanist. The jar bounced off the grass, thankfully not breaking, but when it landed, the lid fell off without much effort. The wolfsbane spilled out onto the grass, peeking out from inside of the jar by an inch or so. I'm so sorry, I said, bending down to scoop the plant back inside. Don't touch it, shouted Mary, trying to push me back with her hands. It's incredibly poisonous, even to the touch. Sorry, I said, shrinking back away from the plant. That would have been bad. Why don't you have the lid on tight if it's such a dangerous plant? I always screw the lid on as hard as I can, she said, scooping the wolfsbane in with her gloved hands. As I said, I show this jar to children. Do you Really think I'd let them get so close to it and not keep it secured? Why did it pop off so easily then? I asked. The jar only had one bounce before the lid fell off, and when I was examining it I never touched the lid to loosen it. That I don't know, she mumbled, closely examining the jar herself this time. She looked closely at the plant, then down at the ground. That's strange. What's strange? I asked. A piece of the wolfsbane is missing, she said slowly, looking over the ground. But that shouldn't be possible. Did you ever leave your station between the time you got here and when Marvin died? I asked. No, not once, she said, shaking her head. Not even to use the bathroom? I asked. I didn't run to the bathroom until after asking some customers what all the commotion was about and learning Marvin passed. I thought about it for a moment. Seemed a little bit of a stretch, but I could check with other people to confirm that if I needed to. However, this assured me that wolfsbane was probably the poison that killed Marvin after all. Assuming she was telling the truth, someone took the wolfsbane before I even talked with her. Were you at the cook-offs in Ravendale and Spring Hill? I asked, changing the topic as she placed the jar behind her again. I went to the one in Ravendale but not Spring Hill, she said. Really? I asked. She was on the list for the event in Spring Hill, but I couldn't call her out for it without showing that I had it. I'd have to just fudge the truth a little. I thought I heard you were at both. I signed up to be at Spring Hill, but some personal matters came up and I couldn't make it at the last minute, she said. I wanted so badly to ask about what came up, but I knew that would be pushing my luck too far. I'd have to just let that slide for now. If she wasn't at the Spring Hill one, she couldn't have murdered the werewolf, said Bart. Unless the personal matter was she found out Ned was a werewolf and she wanted to attack him afterward to give herself an alibi of not being there. Did you know Ned McFinn? I asked. Not very well, she said. I know it's not good to speak ill of the dead, but to be honest, I wasn't much of a fan of his. He always rubbed me the wrong way when he talked. Was never a fan of his chili either. She didn't like the previous victim, and she probably was the supplier of the murder weapon for this one, whether intentional or not. When we first started talking, I thought it couldn't be her, but now I wasn't so sure. I also didn't know how to continue without her getting overly defensive. It was nice talking with you again. I smiled. I couldn't think of anything else to ask her without coming across accusative. Good luck with the rest of the cook-off. Oh, that's all? She asked. Okay then. Feel free to come back anytime for a chat. Bart and I walked off to the final station I wanted to question. Seemed a little convenient that she didn't notice a piece of wolfsbane was missing until after I examined it, and also that she never left her station. She wouldn't have had to leave in order to poison Marvin, but if she didn't leave, then how could someone have taken it? I looked back over my shoulder at her. She was staring back at me, a smile on her face. She might have provided the method, but what was her motive?